yeah, like I said, you nailed it with the like I said, taking us for a drive, taking the reader for a ride. And that makes so much sense. Like the grounding in place right away, you're not gonna have to do as much down the road, right?
Yes.
Quality
Yes.
over quantity, definitely. The one of the lines straight from, I believe that first, yeah, the first essay is it's talking about it's quote, of your parents' immense efforts to Americanize, only the rose bushes endure. I believe going back to the old house, and later on in the book you talk about the flags and buying 3 flags the day after 9/11, how everything changed. Um, did do you know the people that live in the house now? Like, did you go by and knock on the door? Like,
I haven't knocked on the door. I mean, I've gone by 100 times, like I'm gonna go home. I'm going home next week. And like, I mean, every time I go, cause also like people still live on the street who I'm still close to. Right. So I
okay,
see them.
yeah,
But no, it's, that thing, you can't go home again. It's like, you really can't. And the place
yes,
that I remember, it's not that place anymore. My dad had a huge garden. It took
uh,
up half of the yard, right? That garden is gone. It's grassed over. Like, so many of the things that I associate with that place aren't there.
right,
I almost feel like I'd feel sadder to
right,
try to pretend that it was the same place.
yes. So the 100th time you drive by, and they're gonna be like, "Oh, there she goes again." If he wants that. All right, okay, fine.
It's
the
only borderline stalkery, I
I exactly
guess.
borderline. Like I said, I love how that chapter, that essay ends with like the physical manifestation of people leaving, that the headless basketball hoops. I want to know, what is Spotlight? You
Spotlight.
talk about Spotlight the game. What is Spotlight?
Oh gosh, I don't know another word for it.
Okay.
It's like when you play hide and seek in the dark, but with a flashlight, and then you,
Okay.
instead of tagging people, like if you get the light on them, then they're out.
Mm. Yeah, shoot, we probably play that. Okay.
I'm
Yeah.
sure there's another word for it, but I only know spotlight as the word for
It
it.
makes sense. It makes sense. But I mean, like you talk about, there's been a lot there, maybe not as much as one would like, but there's been a lot written about Appalachia. Not always, a lot of the, they always talk about, right? Like, oh, some New York Times reporter goes to, Kentucky and writes like a, man on the scene. But you do such a good job of just avoiding the usual tropes.
Yeah,
We've
well, yes.
because you know it so well, right? I mean, we've read a lot about like, oh, all the opioid epidemic, and all the industry is left. How did you, is it just natural that being from there you were able to avoid those tropes, or did you really have to pay a lot of attention to like what you included and what you didn't include?
No, I mean, I think all of it's true, right? Like, it's not like the opioid stuff isn't happening. It is
Sure.
happening, and it's really intense. And I think even in the first paragraph of the first essay, like, Charleston has a nickname of Needle City now, right? That didn't used to
Mm,
be its nickname. Like, it is all there. And I think that what I felt was like that's all people knew. Like, if you ask
mhm.
people what the thought came to their mind when they heard Appalachia, like, they were gonna say 5 things, and those 5 things were gonna be coal, opioids, um, the Beverly Hillbillies,
Mm.
and, Randy Moss, and,
Randy Moss,
like, I might try to think of one more thing, country
Jason
roads.
Williams. Oh,
Yeah, there you go. Look at you, Jason Williams and Randy Moss went to high school together,
they
believe it or
did,
not.
right? Wasn't a
Mhm.
quarterback to receive? He was a quarterback. I think Jason
Yeah.
Williams was.
Yeah, and they
Yeah.
played basketball together too, and really, they were
Hmm.
amazing on the basketball court. They went to
Right.
my like, one of my rival high schools, so I got to
Oh, okay.
watch them play when they were in high school, which was amazing. But
Oh, yeah.
yeah, there'd be like 5 things they'd know,
Sure.
and then that would be all, right? And all of their ideas would be formed based on those 5 things. And so what I
Mm.
felt like I wanted to do in the book was be like, well, yes, I can acknowledge all of those things, and there's so much more. And
Right.
this is a much more complicated place than the mainstream narrative gives it credit for being. Um, the flatness of the narrative around Appalachia is the thing I really was trying to push back against, which is,
Hmm.
you think this place is one thing, but
Hmm.
what I'm gonna try to show you is how many different things it is, right? So you think Appalachia is all coal. Well, let me talk to you about chemicals,
Sure.
which
Yeah, yeah,
are a
yeah.
massive industry in Appalachia, but it's not the thing people talk about.
Mm.
Um, and you think that Appalachia is all white, but I'm gonna talk to you about immigrants and Indian immigrants. And you think it's Christian, and I'm gonna talk to you about Hindus. And I'm gonna just like
Mm.
keep pushing your brain to
Yeah.
be like, and there's more, and there's more, and there's more. And that is not to say that my more is also in all inclusive, right?
Sure.
the name of the book is Another Appalachia,
One
and
of
it's
many, huh?
one of many, right? It's
Mhm.
another. It's that there's not one, there are
Mm.
many, is the goal, right? And I'm just trying to disrupt your brain enough to make it so that you can't have that stereotype anymore,
Mm.
because you you every time you try to go to that place, it's interrupted by like, "But wait, like, I've heard about this other thing. I've heard about this other thing. I've heard about this other thing."
Mhm.
That's how I think you bust stereotypes in the long run, is to be
Mm.
like, if I give you enough counterexamples, you can't hold that stereotype anymore. It falls apart because you now have a much broader picture and a more nuanced view.
Mhm.
And so that's, I think, what I was writing into, was trying to write like, what does a nuanced picture of this place look like? How can
Mm.
I push you to get past your stereotypes and into like real human beings and real relationships and like substantive time in this place, such that like your brain won't give you permission to stereotype in the
Mhm.
same way.
Wow, that's a great line, man. Another great disruptor of brains is W. Kamau Bell,
Yes.
right? He did that recent episode in Appalachia. Were you were you mentioned in an article on CNN? Or were you in the documentary? Both?
No, I wasn't in the documentary, although a lot of my good friends were, which was amazing. 'Cause
Okay.
the documentary really focused on Black folks in Appalachia, which is like just
Uh-huh.
awesome. And really important, again, to like show that that is not recent history, that is long history.
Sure.
Booker T. Washington was born 20 minutes from where I grew up.
Mm.
Carter G. Woodson is from West Virginia. Like like this is old history,
Henry
right?
Louis Gates, you said.
Henry Louis Gates, you got
Yeah.
it. Walter Dean Myers, as another teacher you'll appreciate. Walter Dean
The
Myers,
great.
his grandma was from Bridgeport.
Whoa.
And he when he if you ever read his memoir Bad Boy,
Mm.
um, he wrote a young adult memoir about getting in a lot of trouble in New York and getting sent to West Virginia to live with his grandma.
Uh,
So this is like, these are like generations of people who've
mhm.
been in this area, right? And Kamau Bell did an awesome job, I think, of showing not just like, here are people who are here in the present, but also what is the history
Sure.
of Black Appalachia. I had the really lovely experience of getting to talk to a CNN reporter who is also Desi. Her family is
Mm.
from Pikeville, Kentucky,
Okay.
and she reached out to me to do like a companion piece to say,
That's what I
okay,
thought, yeah.
yeah, so Kamau Bell's telling this story. I'd like to do a companion piece about both her experience and mine,
Uh,
which is kind of neat.
wow, very neat. The um the second chapter, the second essay starts with talks about your parents coming over to the United States, talks about your dad and the basically putting an end by himself almost to like the rabid dogs in his part of India, right?
Well, in a village, but
In a
yes,
village,
yeah,
yeah. Well,
yeah,
not
yeah,
right, not at the whole
yeah.
like state or region.
No, just the village where he was at the
but
time.
but very impressive. And that, when people say, oh, we didn't know there were Indians in, let's say, West Virginia, you talk about a lot of times it was they went to places that had rural and urban poverty. Maybe there were places that weren't as quote unquote desired. I thought a lot of Abraham Verghese. Have you read his
Yep,
work?
I have. His work was super important. Actually, his work was super important to my parents. It
Okay.
is to me, but I think for my parents, when In My Own Country came out, I think there was like this real deep feeling of being seen. That was their
Mm,
mirror. I think in
mm,
many ways, his book became their mirror of like,
yeah.
he was in East Tennessee in the mountains, but
Right.
similarly, sort of like telling the story of being the Indian doctor in a
Hmm.
rural place. Yeah, it was a really, really powerful book, I think, for my family when it came out.
He am I correct? I think Verghese is like George, or it's like a Christian name. I believe the
Yes.
history of it, right?
Yes, he is South Indian, and his family, I think, is South Indian. They're Christian, so
Yeah.
yes.
It's
Also
like a very common name.
Abraham. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. He crossing the fingers. I think I might get him on next year. I was talking to him. I think he has a book coming out next year.
Can I come
Um
back?
yeah, no, you can be the little window. You can be the third Zoom, window.
I would
I'm
I
serious.
would
I'm serious. I'm serious. Let's do
I
it.
would, like, fall over with joy if I got to do that.
He
Please.
I was just in touch with him on email and incredibly just nice. I would be the one who would be unbelievably honored to have him. He was kind of like, oh, I'm sorry, not this doesn't work now, but maybe in 2023. But for me, it was the tennis partner was an incredibly
Mhm.
moving book.
Yeah,
Incredibly
and
moving
I
book.
mean, I don't know, did you read Cutting for Stone?
I have that in my library. I've read a little bit of it. I haven't unfortunately read the whole thing. No.
Speaking of books that give you chills, Cutting
Yeah.
for Stone is an epic. It's
Okay.
incredible. Yeah,
Um,
it is a masterpiece of a book. It's like sometimes I read a book and I'm like, how did you do that? You know, that
yeah.
feeling.
Yeah.
I had that feeling when I read Cutting for Stone, which is like, how did your brain do this? How did it put
Okay.
all these stories together? I felt that way when I read All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. Where I was just like,
Uh-huh.
I need like if I could open your brain and like figure out how you are organizing stories and putting this all together and thinking about these threads, it was really just awe-inspiring. And Cutting for Stone is like that. It is a tremendous piece of work.
Well, maybe you can. Like I said, maybe you can be part of it. So we'll put it out in the universe so both of us can be talking to him maybe in 2023.
Well, that would be
You
like
know?
I would have peaked. I will say that I will have peaked
Only
if I get
downhill
to
from there,
pretty
right?
much.
But I mean, you know, a very obviously a worldwide tragedy. Correct me, is it Bhopal is how you pronounce
Hmm.
it?
Yep.
Right. So another great writer, Indian American writer, is Chaya Bhuvaneshwar.
Hmm.
Do you know her work at all?
I do. She actually lives like 20 minutes from me.
That's
Yes.
right. She's a Bostonian. I know she's from New
Yeah.
York originally. But so she, one of her stories in her collection, The White Elephant, one of her stories is about is fictional account of the 1984 explosion, right?
Yeah.
And so your dad was working for Carbide. What is that the full name of the company?
Union Carbide.
Union Carbide, right?
Yeah.
And in reaction to that, I want to say there were like 2,000, 3,000 who were killed.
Oh, I mean, the official reports are probably lowball, right? Like,
Okay.
yeah, I think some people have said upwards of
Oh my
10, 15,000.
God.
It's unclear. Like, yeah, the difference between the official reporting and the unofficial
Hmm.
numbers is quite wide there.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, the thing to know is that that chemical plant had like a wall around it, and
Uh-huh.
in India, and even now, then and even now, for folks who are like who do not have any other form of shelter, like if there's
Uh-huh.
a wall, that gives me one surface, right?
Okay,
And
right.
then I can put out a tarp or I can do things around it, but I already have one wall here. So there
Hmm.
were a lot of people living in very close proximity to the plant without really any protection.
Sure.
And so they're just the immediate impact of being so close. It impacted a lot of people.
Well, I mean, so you really opened up in that chapter. I mean, that you know, your dad as an Indian American, you know, from India, was kind of trotted out as like a token. I mean, is that safe to say from the company?
Yeah, I mean, I think the company, right, was like, we're gonna have to send a team to respond to this. It
Uh-huh.
would be really good for us if the person who was the
Right.
face of this, or if one of the people who's the face of this is an Indian person. I think that's the
Right.
way they thought about it.
Right.
Um, yeah.
Which obviously goes with a lot of themes throughout the book, later essays too, about, you know, this idea of having to be a standout or feeling like you have to be a standout or be quiet, you know, in some ways be go along with like the mainstream culture, right?
Yep. Yeah.
It sounds like, and you know, you talked about a lot of maybe your earlier conversations with your dad. You remember them being more like monologues rather than conversations, dialogues. Do you have you talked to him about those times? I mean, to imagine what he was going through, what his decision making was.
He really doesn't talk about it.
Yeah,
You know, it's like I think it was incredibly hard and I think
sure it
probably really
was.
traumatic, like which is not a word that we often like assign to
Mm,
our parents, but I can
right.
only imagine what it was like to go into disaster,
Mm,
right? When most people are leaving and you're going in and you're responsible for like explaining or treating or doing any of those things. I think it probably was really hard. It's not something he talks about.
right.
But I do think that the pressure on him was incredible. And he was younger than I am. He was
Mm,
39, right?
mm,
And so it's like he's 39, he has 2 kids, he's an immigrant in Appalachia. I think he
mm.
was pretty clear about the stakes for him and his
Yeah.
family. And I
Right.
think, something I feel like I've really spent lots and lots of time thinking about as I get older is just how much of my parents' choices was circumscribed by fear
Mm,
and was circumscribed by like, there is no safety net. Like,
mm.
we are the safety net. Like, if this doesn't work, there's nothing under us. Like, that is an incredible weight to carry all the time.
Yeah, I bet.
And it's a weight that I don't have to have because of them. Right.
Right.
Um, but I think that that was very salient for them all the time.
Well, I mean, what makes one of the things that makes the book so great is that, it's not binaries, it's not evil and angel. It's you write about yourself, not always you don't make yourself out to be perfect because nobody is,
Yeah.
but there's the idea of you very similar to your father. He's an ethical person in the neighborhood. He helps everyone out with medicine, with advice. I like how you wrote that you as a teacher have given so many loans with 0% interest, right?
Yeah.
We know what that's like,
Yep.
you know. And then kind of the opposites of him, if whether he was forced to or not. And there's, like you said, there's so many different things going on there, but you as more of the rabble rouser as a teacher. And then this idea of towing the line with him being the first generation, you being second generation, where you have more of a safety net, like you just said so well.
Yeah.
Right.
And I also have a union, which my dad didn't have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's also not a small thing, right? My dad
Right.
was not a member of the union. He worked with, like, the folks he was working with were all unionized, but he was
Uh-huh.
not in the union.
Yeah.
So even just thinking about that safety net is different. Like, I can say a lot and I have a lot of protection from my union in saying what I say.
Mhm.
It creates, again, it's another kind of safety net.
Definitely. The third chapter, help me please, is it Navratri?
Navratri,
Navratri.
yep.
Navratri.
Yeah.
It talks about the real small and insular, and I mean that in the most positive way, small, insular, warm community. Um, and just how every auntie is profiled, and you see how this community has shaped you. I love that. And it ends with your mom. So, it's kind of going around this circle. I love that, like, idea of like a moment in time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's now Navratri starts on Monday. So this is like,
Oh,
I
wow.
wrote it during that time of year. It is that time of year again. I'll be home for the first time in a really long time. I'm
Hmm.
gonna be home for Navratri.
Yeah.
And so it will be interesting because a lot of those aunties aren't there anymore. But
Oh, wow.
so I have to figure out what I'm gonna do. But
Right.
yes, very much about like all of these women who shaped me in lots of different ways.
I just feel like, some of the great movies and TV shows that have that, that frozen in time. I don't mean like Zach Morris Frozen in Time. You get that reference, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Although that's pretty good too. But just that, like, and just kind of like, wow, what a moment in time, and just going around, and it ends with your mom as like the builder of bridges, the one who brought people together. Um, the fourth chapter, Wilt. We're talking about Wilt the Still. We're talking about Wilt Chamberlain,
Yeah.
right? So I may be conflating some stories here. You probably know this one too, where Shaq, I think, actually worked with Rick Barry, who was famous for the underhand free throws.
He was
And
the assistant coach, wasn't he, for the
probably right.
I think he was the assistant coach for the Lakers for a time.
And Shaq was doing really well, but he just nope,
His
because
free throws.
it doesn't look cool. It doesn't look cool. You look like a wimp. Blah
Yeah,
blah
and Shaq
blah.
was a terrible free throw shooter, right?
That's what
Like
I mean. Yeah.
that was his weakness. He was the worst at shooting free throws. And yeah,
Right. My understanding was that he pretty much was like, yes, this will help me do a lot better, but no, I'm not going to do it
I
because,
know.
right. So what was the importance of, you said that was a story that really resonated with a lot of people in your writing classes and stuff, your writing community. What's the connection to you and Wilt? I mean, are you as good of a player as Wilt? More or less, I
No,
mean, kind of same.
not at all. Uh, no, not at all. I think that the connection for me isn't to Will, except that I similarly to him and like that I really struggled with shooting granny style for I think the same reasons that Shaq struggles and that Wilt struggled, which is
Mm-hmm.
like this feeling that it somehow makes you less, right?
Mm.
In a context where I already felt like I was less. So it would like confirm a thing that I already was feeling.
Uh-huh.
Um for me, what's powerful about that story is it's about the role of mentors in your life and like how much of an impact it can have when an adult is just beside you
Mm.
for a long period of time and just is like, I'm here,
Yeah.
I'm here, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I'm here and I'm gonna be here. I think so much of how I am as a teacher is shaped by how I was coached by Carl Bradford.
Mm.
Because I learned so much about adult child relationships that are not your parental relationship, but like
Sure.
how an adult can be a nurturing presence in someone's life over time. I had that. And so
Mm.
I think I have former students who are 30 who like I'm still in
Mhm.
very, very close touch with, right?
Mhm.
I think I know how to do that because that was done for me.
Right.
And so I think part of why I love that essay is it's a place where I really get to honor that relationship and the way that I think it still informs like so much of who I am as an adult.
Mhm.
Part of what I think is really important about that essay is that Carl Bradford passed away several years
Oh,
ago. And I think for his kids when that essay was published, I think it was a really powerful experience um, to see on the page, like, someone who you love so much and that, like, someone else saw
yeah,
everything you loved in that person,
definitely.
right? That, like, you might have those feelings about your parent, but you don't know that other people also have those feelings,
Mhm.
and you probably never anticipate that, like, they're gonna get written or sort of
Right.
shared in that way,
Right.
and, I mean, they've been amazing, like, they sent me a jersey that
Hmm.
says "Heart and Hustle" on it,
Oh,
um,
yes.
actually, on my book tour, I got to see several members of his family at different readings, and um, they, like, carved me a plaque for my book tour in honor of it with
Mm.
wood from his wood garage. So it's, like, wood that he had saved, and
Oh,
they, like,
wow.
made me a beautiful plaque with it. Yeah, so I think it's just also part of what makes it special is I think it's the essay where there's the most, like, sort of feeling of, like, honoring someone in a way that not a lot of people get to be honored in their lives.
Mhm. When you said, um, is there a difference for you for feeling different versus feeling less than? Is that was different the same as less than? You're talking about like, that maybe the underhand free throws would set you apart.
I
That
think it is possible to feel different and not feel less than if no
uh-huh.
one's making you feel less than. I think that's possible.
Yeah.
I think that unfortunately, like, and I talk about some in the book, but I think that there were a lot of messages of less than happening too. And so it didn't just feel different, it felt
Right.
less,
Right.
right?
Really stood out to me is that you wrote in that chapter that you something to the effect of you never felt so American as you did with Coach Bradford,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
Man, the fifth chapter, the fifth essay, Mr. B. Oof, man. So you write a lot about Mr. B and how much he and his wife did for you, how much they and other families were like not sure what to do with a vegetarian, Hindu family, and they made it work. And but just that you were an odd couple, you and Mr. B, and you'd work together on things and help each other out. And he unfortunately lost his wife a few years back. Your parents even did like a dedication of like a hospital ward or hospital room.
A hospice room. Yeah.
Right. But as years have gone on, he's become more virulent, because of Facebook, social media, Trump this, Trump that, anchor babies, all just the vile, the vile things. How do you how do you balance those things? How do you balance the fact that you had so many years, so many great years together, but it seems to be impossible? You're talking about you like wanted to write something on his Facebook, but you stopped.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I really trust the love, and that makes me want to interrogate what's happened and
Mm,
to feel like it's actually something that's happened to him, right?
right.
Like, and not just happened to him, I would actually say this is a thing that has happened to lots of people in our country. Lots of people have been sold a really raw deal and they've
Mm,
been sold a hateful narrative. And in the absence of other narratives,
mm,
and in the presence of a lot of desperation and a lot of pain,
which is real. Uh-huh.
people have bought the narrative, right? Like
Mm,
like I see the same thing Mr. B sees when we look at our hometown. It's not
mm,
okay what's happening there. It's
mm,
not a healthy place. People are struggling. The difference is my understanding of why relative to his understanding of why. I
mm,
have one analysis and he has another one. Right?
mm.
And so the thing I feel like I wanna think about, and the thing I think we need to talk about as a country is, like, how are we ending up with such different analyses of what's happening?
Right. Right.
I don't think that the conditions in Appalachia and the Rust Belt are up for dispute. Like,
Mm,
that's not debatable, right?
mm,
Like, you can't debate the existence of an opioid epidemic. You can't debate
mm.
the loss of employment in blue collar jobs. You can't debate the dismantling of unions. Those are facts. Those things
Mm-hmm.
have happened. Where we're running into trouble is in our explanation of why. Like, so what is the root cause of the joblessness? What is the root cause of the addiction? What is the root cause of the
Mm-hmm.
pain? And there's a really simplistic, xenophobic, hateful explanation being offered by
Mm-hmm.
a lot of politicians on the right, which is like, this is all happening because of undocumented immigrants. This is all happening because of queer people and trans people. This is all happening because of Black people. Like, that is the narrative that's being offered, is one of exclusion and hate and blame,
Mm-hmm.
right? And there are other narratives. They're more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're going to have to talk about like 40 years of policy that has basically enabled corporations to like take all their work overseas
Mm-hmm.
and not have to protect workers. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
not an easy, quick
Right.
explanation, but it exists,
Sure.
right? And it's just that I think what's happened is that that hateful narrative is so easy to post and tweet and
Mm-hmm.
share. And I think it's just cemented itself into a lot of people's heads. And it's wrong.
Can
Um
you run for city council or mayor or something, please? Please,
that is a
please.
question I often get asked at my readings, and my answer is no.
Ah,
I don't
yeah,
think anyone
smart,
in
smart.
Boston is interested in that narrative. But I have a lot of faith actually that there are lots of folks in Appalachia who believe the same thing I believe and are trying to do good work.
Yeah, yeah.
Vote for Booker, Kentucky, vote for Booker is what
Okay.
I gotta
Yes,
say,
yes, yes,
right?
yes,
Like,
yes, yes, yes.
right? Like, there are lots of people doing the work, and it's just a matter of like, how do we lift those voices up? How do we amplify those
Sure.
messages? Because there's tons of people there who think the same thing I do and are trying to get loud to combat that narrative. But
Right.
I do really feel like I think it's a thing that's been done to people. Like, I don't
Mm,
think it's a thing where people who I loved suddenly have like morphed into evil demons. Like, I don't
mm.
believe that. I believe that people who I love have been offered really terrible explanations for the conditions that they find themselves in.
Well, the question that really stood with me from that chapter is, the idea of like that West Virginia's non-white population is only about 5%, and that obviously, the privilege that he has, that we have as white men, is that, you're like, oh, I want to shield him from this, shield him from that, or you give him this break. Oh, he's older. Oh, he's had trauma in his life. He's had pain, grief, and then the question was, does Mr. B ever think to shield me?
Yeah.
Next chapter, you describe your partner Laura and you as, quote unquote, quite the complicated pair. Man, I loved it. Thank you for that good memory. My Italian grandparents, were into the usual Sinatra and all that, but they loved Kenny Rogers.
Yeah.
And I love hip hop, and I know Maya, and I know Ghetto Superstar, and I know my daughter sings it, and I'm like, that is the Dolly Parton song. So I went and listened to it on YouTube, where Laura was thinking Maya and you were thinking Kenny Rogers and Dolly Parton.
Yes, exactly.
So if you're listening, listen to Islands in the Stream, right? um, and you're singing different parts, from one lover to, from one corner to another, etc.
They don't
Remind me,
mean the same thing at
right,
all, but
right. Remind me, please, of the meaning of Garhe Avjo.
good Abjo. Not bad, not bad.
Thank you, thank
Uh,
you.
it means come home.
Uh-huh.
It means come home. So, right, like, I think the whole thing in that essay is I have all these questions about what's going to happen when I take Laura home.
Right.
Is my Indian family, who's both Indian and has then spent their adult lives in Southern West Virginia in a very religious and pretty conservative place,
Mm-hmm.
um, how are they going to respond? And knowing that like they'd never be like, oh no, we won't see you, right? That would not
Uh-huh.
happen. But that the question would be like, can we come home? Like, is that going to be okay?
Uh-huh.
Right. Right. Like, yeah, we'll meet you in a restaurant or we'll like see you out here is a
Oh
different
yeah.
thing than saying,
Yeah.
no, come home, stay with us, eat at our table. Like, your family, your home.
Mm.
And so it meant so much that like, in the face of all this doubt that I had built up in my head, right? All the silence that I had filled with like, well, silence must mean
Mm.
that it's not okay. Their response was the opposite. And it was like, you're totally okay. Like, you can come
Yeah.
home.
Yeah. Obviously beautiful to read about that. And the next essay is, it's a sad one and a happy one, and even makes you laugh a bit, because Sam would have laughed. Sam, sorry, about your cousin. Sorry about the loss of your cousin.
Thanks.
And there's, the ritual that you kind of put together, because you're not in India, you're not in an area that has a big Indian population. Americanized version with the coconut.
Yep.
And this idea of leaving it in the water. To remember him, how would you specify or define what the process
Putting the
of the
coconut in the
ritual?
water is?
Yeah.
I think, yeah, it's a way of acknowledging the loss, right? It's like you're sort of like taking the thing that's inside of you and like putting it into the world, right?
Mhm.
So your grief is manifested in the coconut, you're
Mhm.
putting it into the water. I think you're trying to sort of like move your grief a
Mm.
little bit is what you're trying to do there.
Mm.
Although in my case, that grief just kept coming back
Yes.
because coconuts don't sink in the ocean, folks. In case you were wondering,
Uh-huh.
did not work very well. I think one big thing with that essay is a thing I thought about a lot is when you are trying to replicate rituals
Mm.
from a culture, but you no longer in the place where that culture is dominant. Like you're
Uh-huh.
kind of just like uh remaking everything, right? You're trying to like
Mm.
approximate rituals and you're trying
Mm.
to sort of like figure out this thing that made sense over there. How do I make it make sense here? And sometimes it doesn't.
Mm.
But that particularly around grief, like I think um figuring out your grief rituals is so important.
Mm.
Um, but sort of this realization that maybe those like past grief rituals, like they don't work because I'm
Right.
not in the place where they did work.
Right.
Um, and so, a lot of what I had to figure out around Sam is like one of my grief rituals is I watch my cousin Vinny every year
Uh-huh.
around his birthday because he loved that movie and that's a place where I can feel like connected to him.
Mm.
But really, I think it is a challenge that a lot of kids of immigrants face is that we are raised with all of these sort of approximated rituals and
Mm.
we do them when we're kids because we're supposed to. But I think as you get older, like the questions of like, does this ritual fulfill me? Does it give me meaning? Is it helping me to
Mm.
process this thing? I think can be hard questions. And the answer is sometimes no. Like I'm
Mm.
doing it, but it's not doing anything for me.
The chapter ends on, with the kind of a smile, like realizing like, Sam would have had a good laugh out of this. Like that
Yeah.
coconut just wouldn't leave the shore, would leave its shore. I like, in reading it, it's not the coconut refusing to leave shore, it's its shore. And I thought that its was so important,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. It's like it wanted to be there.
Hmm. The Welsh word hiraeth,
Here, yeah, here, yeah.
right? The next essay is about that, feelings of nostalgia. Um, but hiraeth is not exactly nostalgia, or how would you define it as such?
I think I would say here it is like it's I think sometimes when we think about nostalgia, we're thinking about like a past event, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
a past experience. And I think here it is really about like the feelings that were happening. So it's like
Okay.
this it's like there were these feelings that you were having and
Mm-hmm.
you miss the feelings, right? So it's like
Mm-hmm.
that's what you feel like you've lost is the ability to experience those feelings. You long for those feelings.
Right. And I'm obsessed, first of all, with just words that cannot be translated.
Yep.
And I'm obsessed with saudade. Am I saying that's
Yep.
correct?
Yeah. Yep.
Right. You write so well about that Portuguese word, from your writing. It's the Portuguese word for nostalgia, saudade, a sentiment best expressed in the melancholic longing of fado songs. Um, later, saudade, a sense of missingness of lost lovers or homes, the love that remains even after the objects of that love are gone. Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. And all three of those words, right? That essay is kind of a fun one because it's like three words that like don't actually have a translation.
Right.
You're just like circling around them all the time, being like, what is this
Uh-huh.
thing? What is this thing? Am I feeling this thing? But like there's not an English equivalent for any of those
Yeah.
words.
And just the idea of home is where the family is, which again could come off as a trope or it's been done before, but just the way you finesse it and you massage it in there is just really well done. So some of the other chapters you talk about, like single words that kind of are anchors of the chapter. One is sharam.
Sharam. Yep.
Sharam.
Yep. Shame. Yeah.
Yeah, and just ideas of shame and think that's the one you compared to like the cousin who's like, you know, kind of maybe more risque, like on Instagram, and but also like good for her, you
Yeah,
know,
that's
right?
right. Yeah, the point is not to be like, "Oh, you shouldn't do that."
Uh-huh.
The point is like, why is anyone doing any of this? Like, why is anyone making any of us feel bad about the choices that we make, right? Like,
Right.
do your thing. If that's your thing, go for it
Yeah.
and do it, right? In the same way that, like, if I want to tell stories, like, tell them with
Uh-huh.
blessings as opposed to like feeling this fear or weight that like anything you do, there's going to be a shame response to it.
Right. And just kind of really like emblematic of the success of the book is you do the like the historical or mythical connection to like Ramayana and Sita.
Hmm.
And this is, sorry, Sita was the woman, or Sita
Yep.
was the woman,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And that she like totally against her will was like kidnapped, but then when she was returned, it's like, well, what happened to her? Has she been defiled? Like, right, totally innocent in the matter.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then ends with that beautiful image of like, kind of like, if that the child of you from, I don't know, maybe a picture when you were 4 or 5, something like that, you could have been more like Priya.
Right.
Am I kind
Right.
of, am I saying that right?
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. Like to
Yeah.
not have that weight of shame, which she doesn't seemingly, which is awesome, right? It's
Uh-huh.
kind of, I think there's some envy.
Mm.
Envy maybe is like too intensive a word, but like kind of looking and being like, you are free of it, and that's amazing. And like,
Uh-huh.
I want that freedom, and I definitely want my daughter to have that freedom. I don't
Right.
want her to like live her life calculating
Mm-hmm.
how much shame is it going to bring if I do this thing that like,
Mm-hmm.
um, and because I think the question that I really am trying to think about in that essay is like, who does shame serve?
Yeah.
Right? Who's it
Uh,
for? Because it's
right.
definitely not for the person who it's being put on.
That's for sure.
They're not benefiting from it. And so, like, you know, really that in the context of like my culture and family, shame serves patriarchy. Shame
Mm-hmm.
serves controlling women's bodies, it serves controlling women's minds, it serves controlling women's words. And so what was being sort of like messaged to me as like inappropriate was really um you're pushing back against patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're disrupting the norms around who has power,
Mm-hmm.
because when you put words on paper, like, you're asserting power.
Definitely. No doubt about it. It's a good connection too to you know, ideas of shame. And uh, I was looking for it in the words you're using in the book. I think I'd maybe recognize if I heard a little bit of it, but a lot of my students who speak Punjabi or Urdu or Hindi, they recognize it. We watched the Patriot Act with Hassan Minaj.
Yeah, yes, definitely.
And so 9/11, you talk about the difference in, you know, where you grew up in the post and pre. And he has a story, and I'm, people listening, sorry, I've used this story probably 3 or 4 times, but he writes about 9/12, September 12th, and how there was racism against him and his family. His car, you know, his car windows were broken in, and that image of his dad like sweeping up the glass and saying basically in Hindi, I believe, like, what will people think?
Yeah, well, he has the
Shame.
piece in Homecoming King too, right?
I'm sorry, that's the one. I'm so Patriotics, I think it's a show, right?
Yeah,
Homecoming
Homecoming
King.
King
Pardon me. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Yep.
is the Lok Kya Kahenge, like, what are people
There it
gonna
is.
say, right?
Mm-hmm.
He talks about it in the context of the wanting to go to prom with the girl, like, and yes,
Right.
just this, right. I think it is a thing that a lot of your students will resonate with, and it's
Mm-hmm.
definitely something I resonate with. This sense of like, what are people gonna say if we do this thing? And then the question
Mm-hmm.
becomes, well, who are the people? Like, who are we talking about when
Yeah,
we
yeah,
say
yeah, yeah,
people will say something? It's like, who are the people? Do we really care what they think?
yeah.
And also, like, what is it about them that makes it so what they think matters so much, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and for me, like, yeah, I'm 43. It has taken me a really long time to sort of like ask that question of who is this for? Who does it
Mm-hmm.
serve? And when you start to ask that question, what you realize is most often the people not served are the people who are more marginalized in the situation.
Mm-hmm. In the last essay, not like a plot spoiler